A super common topic of discussion and I often see pop up in Facebook groups for Spanish teachers that I'm in is heritage speakers. Maybe you have them in your novice level Spanish classes and somebody just said, oh, Spanish, Spanish, we'll just put them together, even though that level is totally inappropriate for them. Or maybe you get assigned a heritage speaker class for the first time and you're going, what do I teach them? I've never taught this class before. I don't have a curriculum. I wasn't given anything. I don't know what to do. This conversation comes up all the time. So today what we're going to talk about are tips for teaching heritage speakers, whether they're in the wrong class, but you're just going to teach them anyways and do your best to support them, or how to teach your heritage speaker class. What can you teach them? What does your curriculum look like? Where do you even get started? Let's get right into it. Hi, my name is Ashley, aka Scenario to Spanish. We provide easy-to-use resources to save you time and energy while you're lesson planning. If you're new here, I just want to make sure that you know that links to everything that I mentioned in this video will be down in the description box below. And today, we're talking about heritage speakers, right? So while I've experienced that first scenario that I mentioned where I have heritage learners mixed into my Spanish 1 class where you're like, what am I going to do with you? I've never had the opportunity to teach a heritage speaker class. So today I asked an expert to come on in and answer some of our questions and just provide some tips and teaching experience that I don't have with you to answer your questions. So today Courtney Nygaard is going to come on in and answer our questions about working with heritage speakers. Hey Courtney, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your teaching experience working with heritage learners? How did you come to teach a heritage speakers class in the first place?
Hi, I'm Courtney Nygaard. Thanks so much for having me, Ashley. I'm really excited to talk about my favorite Spanish class, which is Heritage Spanish class. My story, actually, when I first started teaching this class, I was extremely nervous, and my colleague and I, one of us was going to have to teach it. We were inheriting it from the teacher that was retiring. But it's a class that's very intimidating because students can do so much with their Spanish, and instead of an acquisition focused class, it's a fusion of so many different things. And to be honest, our school, we didn't have a set curriculum for the class. We had some old textbooks, but the teacher really wasn't even using those. And so I knew that taking over the class is going to be a huge challenge and undertaking. So I was nervous, very nervous, but I did take it over, and long story short, it became my favorite class to teach.
Okay, and can you tell me who are heritage speakers exactly, and what's the difference between a heritage speaker and a native speaker? Because sometimes I think those terms get interchanged, and are they actually interchangeable, or what's the difference?
So the thing about heritage speakers versus native speakers is that a lot of schools actually call their class Spanish for native speakers, when if you look at the students in the class, most of them are not actually the definition of a native speaker. Because a native speaker is someone who has been educated in a country that speaks that language. Society all around them is speaking that language as the primary language. That's how they're a native speaker of that language. But a lot of students, they've actually been born in the US and all of their schooling has been in English, and they're learning Spanish from their family. And so that's where the heritage component comes in. They're a heritage speaker because yes, they're fluent in Spanish, but it's mostly all the vocab and things that is getting spoken in the confines of the home or family. So there's not a lot of academic language in Spanish, and there's really not a history of reading or writing academically in Spanish because all their schooling has been done at school in English, right? And so when we talk about should this class be called heritage speakers or native speakers, look at your students and have the majority of those students been raised in the US, gone to school in English, or are they like newcomers from another Spanish-speaking country? That's what we would say our native speakers are. A lot of what we categorize as our English language learners, students who have just come here from another country. Their Spanish is fluent, but they're learning English. Those students are native speakers of Spanish. Now, there's rare cases where, yes, you have enough native speakers or students that have maybe gone to like a Spanish immersion school, and they're living in the US, but they're at a proficiency level, or we could consider them a native speaker level, then you could call your class native speakers. So kind of just differentiating between those two terms is important. And I also just want to say about that is that these labels that we're putting on students, we're not trying to put students in a box by saying that. What we're trying to say is that we're meeting you at your needs. And so when we can correctly assess your level, then that's going to help us better meet your needs. I do have a whole lesson on fostering a growth mindset with students about their language abilities, just because sometimes when there's a mixture of native speakers and heritage speakers in the same class, they're inadequate or they're not as good as the other students. And so I have a lesson called Mi Mapa de Input Lingüístico. And what we do is we map out where all of their input has come from in Spanish and where all of their input has come from in English. And they can really start to see like, oh, like from family and TV and all these things in my life, I'm getting Spanish, or all these things in my life like school and music, I'm getting English, right? And so it can kind of paint a picture for them of like, this is why you have what you have for your language. We're having a growth mindset. It's okay to not be where you want to be with your language abilities, but the best thing we can do is just keep trying and keep having a positive attitude towards where you're at instead of feeling like inferior or inadequate or comparing yourself to other students in the classroom.
One of the things that I see asked about most often in Facebook groups is somebody saying, help, I got assigned a heritage speaker class and I don't have any curriculum. There's no budget for a curriculum. I don't know what to do. I don't even know we're going to get started. What does a curriculum look like for a heritage speaker class? Can you share about that with us?
So back to the story of me teaching heritage. So when I took that class over, the textbook was way too hard for my students. And so I was at a place where I was creating things from scratch in order to meet their needs. And so my first unit that I did with them was my identity unit, which now has been updated, and it's a really rich unit that's kind of like an essential starting place for heritage class. Basically with the curriculum, I have 4 main components. So the 4 main components are reading, writing, culture, and community. There's those 4 components we're focusing on. Heritage speakers, they need a lot of input, just like L2 learners need a lot of input, but for heritage speakers, the input that they need is specifically written input. And so that's why we do a lot of reading and then a lot of writing practice to try to increase their production abilities. Really though, this class, it's so fun because we can fuse together 3 disciplines. So the 3 main disciplines that we're kind of mixing together is language arts, history, and then just kind of like a cultural exploration. And so when you have all those elements you're combining, it's a very different class, and really it's stuff that you don't learn when you go to school to become a language teacher, right? We didn't go to school to become language arts teachers or history teachers, so it was a huge learning curve when I took over this class. But little by little, I've started to put together a curriculum, and that's called the Ascendencia curriculum, and it's a 3-year rotating curriculum. So the curriculum has to rotate because I have the same students in the class for about 3 years, sometimes 4. And so I don't want to repeat the content with those students. We didn't have enough sections to level it out, like saying like Heritage Speakers 1 or Heritage Speakers 2. So what we do is we have 9th through 12th graders all in the same course, and then each year it's different content. And so it's interesting because we have new students coming in and students graduating, so it's always a little bit of a rotating situation, but we're never repeating the content for students. So that's why I've created 3 different year-long curriculum cycles that I can teach, and then students aren't repeating content.
What would you say is the biggest challenge when it comes to teaching a heritage speaker class?
My biggest challenge, I think, is that there's so many levels in the same class. Even if you have Heritage Speakers 1, Heritage Speakers 2, Heritage Speakers 3, even different levels, you're still gonna have so many different linguistic backgrounds in that same classroom. And so a lot of the game becomes differentiation. How can we differentiate for students by maybe reducing what we require for their output, or, offering a lot of different free reading books. I have built a classroom library of a lot of different books for 10 minutes of free reading at the beginning of class. And so when you have all these different book levels, you can help students find something that's more approachable for them. But just having different versions of a reading for class texts and things can be really helpful, because these students, they do deserve to have their needs met. And so that's kind of been like the biggest passion piece in all of this, is just that I feel like heritage speakers, they deserve to have a class that's meeting them where they're at. And sometimes that's not happening. It's just crazy to me because if you think about it, we would never think of putting like an L1 English speaker in school, putting them in the ESOL class or the class for English language learners. We would never do that. We would just, oh, if the class is full, we're gonna have to open another section for the language arts class because, well, they're not gonna go into the class for English language learners, they already speak English. But when we put heritage speakers in a class for students that are just now acquiring Spanish, we are not doing a good thing by those students. And so for me, it gives me purpose to be able to create resources and materials that enable and empower heritage teachers to be able to come to class feeling like confident, knowing what they're doing. They actually have resources that their students are engaged with and are having fun with. That is just something that really makes me excited, because the idea of students losing their family language, that's just heartbreaking to me. And I really feel like having this heritage class is a safe space for them at school, and it just like helps them continue their bilingual journey, and it's going to be so helpful for them in the future. And I know when I talk to my students, like they all have plans and hopes of continuing to speak Spanish with their kids someday. So just the more opportunities we can give them to increase their bilingual skills is amazing.
Okay, we talked about the biggest challenge. What is your favorite thing when it comes to teaching heritage Spanish classes?
So my favorite thing is class parties, because we have a blast and we do these about 3 times a year, and students will make a list on the board of what they're gonna bring in. They really take charge and they go all in on planning the party, and the amount of delicious food that we get to eat and the dancing that happens in class, like it is so much fun. So I love class parties. If your class is not super lively like that, I've also done more like relaxing parties where we do like play loteria and have like pan dulce and stuff like that. More relaxing for those like first hour classes that are still waking up. But having class parties is my favorite thing. But then also just getting to speak Spanish. I get to speak so much Spanish with students that are like getting it, they're with me, we're talking back and forth, and it's so fun too when we get those students that have just come from another country and they just like kind of bring the level up in the class where everyone like tries harder to speak only in Spanish, because we want to not be rude to that student. So that's really fun.
What tips do you have for someone who has heritage speakers mixed into their L2 classes?
So if you have heritage speakers mixed into your L2 classes, that's really challenging. It's tough because we're basically teaching 2 different classes, but it happens, and it happens a lot. So what I would suggest doing is doing a lot more self-paced things for them. Some things could look like, I have like an analysis unit, so it's a literary analysis where it's a packet. The learning objectives are on the first page, and then as they work through the novel, whatever level novel you want to assign them, they work through the pages, and then you can check them off to keep them on track, and you can stamp the learning objective on the first page. So that's something that's a self-paced unit that you can do. There's a lot of different self-paced lessons that I have in the Ascendencia curriculum, but just giving them something that's a little bit more challenging and that's going to push them forward, as opposed to just learning along with the rest of the class.
And what resources can you recommend for learning more about teaching a heritage speaker class, especially for those ones who mentioned, maybe they just got it thrown into their load, they're brand new to this. Where do they go to even get started?
So for teaching class, you can definitely check out my blog at profenygaard.com and also heritagespanish.com. And you can find a ton of free resources that I have available right there on my blog. There's some other blogs I recommend as well: Adventures in Heritage Teaching, Growing with Heritage Learners, Growing Global Citizens, and My Generation of Polyglots. Those are some good blogs to check out. There's also some cool workshops being offered by some of those teachers. And there's a really cool Facebook group for heritage teachers. So if you search up heritage Spanish teachers, you're going to find the Facebook group. Just finding other people that are also in this boat of learning how to teach heritage Spanish. So you're not alone. There's a lot of resources, a lot of support you can find. I'm happy to help, so you can always contact me, reaching out on my blog, heritagespanish.com or profenygaard.com. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Thank you for taking your time to answer our questions and share your expertise with us. Make sure that you check out Courtney's resources down in the description box below, where you can see her website, her blog, and all of the other things that she has shared with us today. If this video was helpful, make sure you give it a thumbs up, click that subscribe button, and ring that bell so you get notified of all new content I create for you in the future. And maybe if you have a teacher friend who's in that, I was just given a heritage speaker class and I don't know what to do, click that share button and send this their way so that you can help them out. All right? Thanks so much for watching. Bye.